So let's take a look as we continue diving into the teams and their offseason and what can be expected of them in year 5 of the Canadian Premier League. We are making our way to Forge. This has been a highly successful team. They are the defending North Star Shield champions, and this is a team that's won it 3 times, and absolutely zero surprise that there's been minimal movement. This isn't a team that makes a lot of moves, Ollie. So, Grant is out, Crutzen, we know, is out. And they've re-signed, nobody's surprised, Henry, Morgan, Choinière, Becker came back. We were wondering if he would. Where else would he go? There's an example of an older player, though, who's a great leader on the team. So what do you make of the one person that has come on in, Ollie, and Mandikar James?
Yeah, he has the potential to be a really big signing. Obviously, this is a guy that was playing Champions League football not all that long ago. Has played for Canada, has all the qualities, the resume to be one of the top central defenders in the league. So that was the big one. Obviously, when you look at that outgoing board for Forge, was who's going to replace Daniel Crutzen. I think they have some good internal candidates in terms of, giving Gavin Matusla a bigger role, giving Malik Owolabi-Bello a bigger role. He's obviously that natural kind of left-sided centre back. But bringing in a proven player like James, someone who, again, has played at a high level, but also as a Sigma guy is very familiar with the players, with Bobby Smyrniotis, you would think that one will be pretty much a home run for Forge. And I think the squad, to be honest with you, looks incredibly strong with the core they've been able to bring back.
Charlie, are their biggest moves their re-signings, though? So you can, have your say on James, but are their biggest moves their re-signings?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And just to finish off on James quickly, though, I know that this only happens because he knows Bobby Smyrniotis so well, right? It sounded like they'd been in touch for a little bit. The time was right for James to come back. He'd been in Ukraine for the last year or so. I think he wanted to come back home, and he was only ever going to go and play for Bobby because he's known him for a long time. They've kept in touch. But I think, Andy, you're right there, that the biggest story in this team is that it's the same, essentially. We talk about Becker signing a new contract. That's huge, obviously. But the biggest one for me is David Choinière signing a new contract with this club, because I don't think it's being talked enough that he had some very legitimate options elsewhere to move on from this club, to play somewhere else, to maybe go up a level or two and go whether to Europe or elsewhere in North America. He chose to stay here and essentially cement himself as who's going to be remembered as one of the legends of this Forge football club, right? And I think that's something that was attractive to him. He's a player who's been there for pretty much every big moment in this club's history, and it was attractive to him to stay there and to be part of that and continue to be that. And I think the thing that struck me a couple of weeks ago when I was at Forge's training was that it feels like nothing has changed. It feels like it was a new season starting, but it felt like they just finished the last one yesterday, right? And all the players are still focused in that sense. I think they made a lot more changes than we maybe think they did last year. At the start of last season, there was some more turnover there, with obviously Hajabrapor coming in, Sissoko, Rama, a lot of players, even mid-season, that kind of made this squad look a little bit different than it did the year before. But now they've settled on this sort of current core, and I think, again, there's really no reason to expect that they won't still be the team to beat in the CPL, I think.
Oh, are we having this conversation again? Is anyone going to actually dethrone Forge? I know Pacific did it. They squeaked in. Forge won the first 2. Pacific won, the third North Star to break up their hat trick. The pure hat trick, but they did still end up getting one by winning it again last year, Ollie. Is this still going to be the team to beat?
Yeah, I'll go a step further, and there's 3 weeks of preseason to go and more signings to come, obviously. So we'll see what the other teams do. But looking at the rosters right now, I'm not sure that there's ever been a bigger gap between Forge and everyone else. Not just in terms of the quality of players they have. You can go down that roster and see the best players in their position in the CPL all over the park. But it's also the continuity. To bring back 19 players is pretty much unheard of in this league. And it's going to be such a big advantage, I think, particularly in the early part of the season. So I think they look incredibly strong. Look, what is interesting and what makes this season, potentially more interesting than just having one dominant side, as I think Forge look like right now, is that ultimately that trophy does get lifted at the end of the season and not at the start or in the middle. And so can they keep this group together for the entire season would be my question, because there's definitely players on this roster that are good enough to play at higher levels. There are some that I think it's a bit of a surprise they're still there as it is. I'm not sure they were expecting to have Women's Passius for the final last season, let alone to have him coming into another season now. So we'll see what happens with some of those guys maybe as the season goes on. The European window opens in the summer. But looking at that roster right now, I think it's as strong as it's ever been. And like I said, the gap is as big as it's ever been between Forge and anyone else.
Yeah, Bobby, and because he's always been very vocal in saying it doesn't matter if you finish first or whatever. Like, as long as we get into the playoffs, you get a ticket to the dance and anything can happen. And that philosophy has worked for him. Clearly, they've won 3 of the last 4 years. But now you have a season trophy on the line, which obviously comes with its benefits. But because of the new playoff structure, if you do finish first, you also have the ability to make the leap and not play as many games to get to the final. Maybe he likes that. Maybe he wants to rest, because I have a feeling come fall, we're going to have the rest versus rust conversation. That never gets old in sports. Or if he does hover 2nd to 5th, well, now you risk playing more games to get to the final. And then does he want his team? You risk more injury, you risk just being fatigued. All these things that the manager now has to think about, because it does matter to finish first, right?
Well, the other thing that is massive for this club that players will go on and on about, I mean, Kyle Becker pointed this out to me a couple weeks ago. There's a Champions League spot if you finish first. And there's one for winning the playoffs, and there's one for winning the Concacaf or the Canadian Championship. Mm-hmm. That's huge for this club. They didn't have that on the table last year because just the way the format worked, you didn't get a CONCACAF spot for winning a CPL. This year there's 3 chances, and I think the number one priority for Forge is getting back into CONCACAF and playing those games more than really anything else, probably more than winning the league, is just getting into the Champions League again, because that's kind of what pushes the club and the league and the sport in this country forward, right? So that can't be underrated this year either.
No, and you know how else you can get a spot in Concacaf Champions League is by being the Canadian champions. And I wonder if, the 2023 Canadian Championship, Charlie, once we keep having this conversation, is a CPL team going to dethrone an MLS team? Does Forge have the best chances of doing
that? Quite possibly. I mean, I think if we are clearly labeling them as the best team in the league, then you have to think so. Sure. That's kind of a box that they haven't ticked yet, right? They haven't beaten an MLS team yet. They've lost to 2 on penalties, and it was pretty heartbreaking for them both times. I think the way that the bracket is set up generally this year is very good for the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah.
If Forge or any other CPL team on that eastern side of the bracket, you'd only have to play one of Toronto or Montreal, and that would be in a semifinal. Versus, I mean, you look at Pacific and Cavalry as well. They could get to a semifinal, maybe not even have to play the Whitecaps. But in general, Forge definitely want to check that box. They always want to win a trophy, obviously, but I think that they want to be the first Canadian Premier League team to win the Canadian Championship as well. And the fact that they've come so close, and it's really one of the only sort of painful moments that this club has had, has been those losses to Toronto and to Montreal in those Canadian Championship games. So I think that is sort of another fuel for this club, as if they needed any more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that just to add quickly, like that draw could not look any better for the CPL. Like it came out as well as it possibly could have, for them to have Pacific and Cavalry potentially have a home heavy run, playing the Whitecaps at home, maybe in the semi-final. I know Valor are in there as well, but just talking about the teams that have been the top teams in the CPL to this point, like that's fantastic. And then you have one of Montreal or Toronto, they're going to knock the other one out. And you have teams like Forge and Atlético Ottawa in that pathway, playing against, potentially playing against the winner of whoever survives out of those two. So it couldn't look any better. And Forge, I'm sure, as many other teams, CPL teams will be looking at that and thinking we should be in the final of this competition this year.